Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this new week and the new opportunity to study again your word. We just ask that you can guide it, this study, guide our minds, our thoughts, help me in presenting as we go through Millerite history again, but this time with a bit more detail. And I just ask, Lord, that you can help us to understand the things we study and that we can share them with others. May your Holy Spirit be with each person here, with the people that we have contact with. We ask, Lord, that you can use us to your glory, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, it's nice to see everybody here this morning. Now we're continuing the study on the structure of prophetic chronology, and really we've come to the end of our notes, except that we're going to, because some of the things that are in the notes, if you look at the paper that we had to start this, are dealing with Ezekiel's prophecy, and that's not in the context of July 18th. It was just the original context, because the original study that I did on the structure of prophetic chronology was in 2016. It was the one that Jeff had recorded or put on to DVDs, and he was handing out in 2016. It was a presentation or a sermon I did at, well, it wasn't really at Lambert Church. It was supposed to be a Lambert Church sermon, but the power had gone out, and so we had it at the School of the Prophets. And I think the date was July 16th or something like that, 2016, that I'd done this presentation on Ezekiel. And it was called The Structure of Prophetic Chronology. And so from there, I built the whole structure and showed how chronology was connected to prophecy. But really that was initially understood when I looked at the book of Ezekiel and I saw how important all this structure was. But that was just a building block of the structure. So there was obviously more that we've covered. So I wanted to review a little bit, what we have studied just before we go into Millerite history, and try to understand what the Millerites were looking at when they started to study these prophecies like the 2520 and the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. And they were using Ussher's chronology. So, an Ussher, his chronology is very good. I really don't have any problems with Ussher as far as how he comes to his conclusions and how he studies. The only difference really is that 140-year difference that we have regarding the 480 years. And obviously the fine details, information that he didn't have. So I'm just going to review this overall structure. And we'll see how this applies as we go into Millerite history and Samuel Snow's letters. So we know that from creation to the flood, we have this period of 1656 years. And then we have a period of 427 years from the flood to Abram leaving Haran. So this is, we'll call it just Haran. Abram is 75. And this is creation. And of course, this gives us this period of 430 years to the Exodus, which we mark here. I'll deal with the years here later. So we have the Exodus. And then we have the 40 years wilderness wandering. And then we have, and from here, we're going to mark 480 years. So I'm going to do it like this, 480. Probably could have moved things over that way a bit. But this is to the laying of the foundation of Solomon's temple. So I'll just put Solomon here. And this 480 years, Ussher puts it over to here to the Exodus. We put it here to the crossing of the Jordan, or the year of the crossing of the Jordan, when they fully come out of Egypt. And Then there's a period here of 36 years, and I'm just kind of jamming this in, and then 391 years. So this is, we're going to put the years here. This will be the dividing of the kingdom. I'll do this. The kingdom is divided, and this is the temple is destroyed. And then from here, we know that this is 586 BC. So we can then count all these years back here. So we're just going from when the temple is destroyed, taking this 391 years, this 36 years, because there's 4 years in here, and there's another 40 and another 40 for Saul and David. And Solomon, there's 4 years and 36 years. And so this becomes really a simple way to look at this whole line. Now, as far as the structure, there was 2 different things that were important to me as far as this structure. Now, the one, of course, was this, because this was also a part of that where we have this. I'm going to just put the 430 up here, and then to here the 215 and the 215, which is Canaan and Egypt. And this became a pattern. This chiasm became part of this structure that we then could expand. And we recognize that there was a whole bunch of structures dealing with all the time prophecies. But this part of it is still important in the respect of time prophecies. And really, you know, if we don't have the year of the flood, because the problem here, I guess, what I'm getting to, is I have this 40, 46, 45. You know, this is 23, 91, 90. So I'll just put this to 45, just because it's easier. And then when Abraham leaves Haran is 1963. This is 1533. This would obviously be 1493. And when we get here, this is when Solomon lays the foundation of the temple. It's 1013 BC. And so this is all these dates BC. But we can write them as is the year AM, Anno Mundi. And so there isn't a lot of difference, you know, when this part here, as far as Usher is concerned, mine is identical. It's this 40 years that's different. And then the details in this history is slightly different, a year or 2 off here in this. Now, so the Millerites, they had Usher's chronology. But we know that William Miller, he had a different chronology for this period here, the period of the Judges. And the reason that he did that is he wanted to have the world end in 1843. Now, to say that he wanted that, we know that in 1843, that's where Usher, or Miller's prophecies ended. And of course, he had a number of different prophecies, and I'm just going to address these. So we all be familiar, of course, with the 2300 days from 457 BC. And he had 2 other time prophecies that were, well, one other that was based on a day for a year, but another one that was just based on a Jubilee cycle, where he went from here, 607, and he counted from here to here, 2,450 years. So this was called the Jubilees of Jubilees, or the Great Jubilee prophecy that he had. And then he had 677, and from there, he counted the 7 times, which was 2520 years. Now there is a chart that they have. It's a black and white lithography chart where they put these 3 prophecies in there. Now he also had another time prophecy as well, and that was the 1335. So the 1335, which started in 508, that ends in 1843. So this 1335 was this other time prophecy. And primarily, the three that they mostly mention are the 2520, 1335, and 2300 days. So this one wasn't really a time prophecy. It was just a period of time that he marked based on this cycle of Jubilees. And that's one thing you can see about Miller, is that he looked at this as the Jubilee, and partly it was based on the 2520. So based on the sabbatical cycle, he had this, but the 2520 also was going to end with the trumpet of the Jubilee. The 2300 days, initially they didn't have an ending point for it. But one of the things that pointed them to the 10th day of the 7th month was this prophecy and also this prophecy. So there was reasons why they looked to the 10th day of the 7th month. Initially, Miller just had about the year 1843, and then later in 1843, he started to look at the possibility it was going to be in the fall on the 10th day of the 7th month. But then Samuel Snow took that knowledge and then saw that it would actually end in 1844 on the 10th day of the 7th month. Now, the other time prophecy that Miller had, we've talked about this before, but he had this period of 6,000 years that he believed ended in 1843. And in order to do that, you have Usher here with 404 BC, but then you have Miller with 4,157 BC as creation. So you can see that his period of creation, well, it's actually even, let's do this because mine's over here. He even has a longer period for creation. And most of it has to do with the period of the judges. There are some other little details that he works out to try to extend it. He doesn't make the time in Egypt 430 years. So that would be a bigger problem. If you did that, you would actually have to add 215 years onto here. So it was mostly just adjusting the period of the judges to get that extra 153 years between Usher. So here, this period then would be 153 years. And I think this is an important part you're going to see later when I get into Samuel Snow, why I think this number is significant. We know it's the number of fishes. When Jesus met Peter again and told Peter to put out the net on the other side of the boat, and the number of fish they caught was 153. So you've heard about this number. And we've also recognized there's a similarity between this number, 153, and 1533 for the Exodus. So there's some symbols here. These symbols are different, but they are related. So just dealing with this part of it, I'm obviously going to erase this. We're not going to go over this again. But I just wanted to bring out this detail again, because it's going to be important when we get into Millerite history and we start looking at these time prophecies. We can see that Miller is looking for all these different prophecies that are going to end in 1843. And I believe he said there were 7 of them, if I remember correctly. There's more than just what we have here. There's other things that he makes arguments for 1843. So there is, there's a little bit of confusion in that sense, because if you talked about what's the longest prophetic period, well, somebody would have to argue it's 6,000 years. And I know people who believe in the 6,000 years, but yet say that the 2300 is the longest prophetic period brought to view in the Bible based on Great Controversy 351. So, there's a lot of dispute about that amongst different people. Even some people in this message have a different view on how to understand that statement in the Great Controversy. To me, it's just very straightforward. I've never had a problem with it, except that when we tend to read into it, that it's talking about the 2300 days being the last prophetic period, last and longest, which it isn't. and even if you'd say that 2520 is the last and longest, you know, you have to admit that there are some periods that we could look at and say that are longer. So we have to understand what we mean by prophetic period and what Ellen White means by it and what she means by last and longest. You know, somebody would argue that this is the last one because this one hasn't been fulfilled yet. So there's lots of things about Millerite history and how their development of these prophecies came about. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to take our time. We're not going to rush through it. We're going to go right back to the first angel's message, to Miller's understanding, how he came to understand things. And I'm not sure how far we will get today. I don't think we'll get into the second angel's message today. You know, so we won't get there because that's a lot. There's a lot just in the first angel's message. And I don't have notes for this. So I might, you know, ask people to look some things up for me. But that's what I want to do. I want to get through that first angel's message. The only notes I do have is the first angel's message source book. So we're going to use that a little bit. And so I guess that is kind of notes, but they're just not notes that I've written. So if you have the three angels messages source book, you could bring it up if you want to look at it, but I'll bring it up on the screen. There we have it. I'll make it bigger. So hopefully people can see this well as we go through this. Now we're going to read a little bit of this. This is from Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4, The First Angel's Message. And I suggest that people read what she says in this book. I mean, it's an early writing of the Great Controversy. It's a little more condensed than the Great Controversy that we normally think of, either the 1888 or the 1911 Great Controversies. And it's written more for Seventh-day Adventists. So it wasn't written so much for the world, which she then added more material to the Great Controversy and changed some of the language in the way that she wrote things. And this covers, you know, of course, the Millerite period, very much like the Great Controversy does, the later editions of it. I like it because it's a little more succinct, so there's less to read to cover that same period of time. But I'm going to look at what she says in the Great Controversy. So she says here, the prophecy of the first angel's message brought to view in Revelation 14 found its fulfillment in the Advent movement of 1840 to 44. Now, she variously talks about the Advent movement, sometimes from different periods of time. Sometimes she'll talk about 42 to 44, sometimes, you know, 43 to 44, depending on what she's talking about. But we would take that this period of the Advent movement from 1843 to 1844 would really cover August 11th, 1840 to October 22nd, 1844. And many of you know that that is a period of 1,533 days, which we think is very significant, that it's that period of time. So that's, you know, the period that she's going to be talking about and we would often put the first angel's messages arriving in 1798. So when you talk about the first angel's message here, and she talks about Revelation 14, found its fulfillment in the Advent movement of 1840 to 44, she's obviously referring to the empowerment of the first angel's message on August 11th, 1840. But she would recognize that the first angel's message came before then. was introduced. And I'm going to draw this here. I just want to start putting this on a line, and we'll come back to it. So we know we have 1798, and we would put, the first angel arrives. This is the time of the end. Right? It's the time of the end. The first angel arrives. It's 1798. And to actually mark this time, I tend to put it as February 15th, when the Pope was taken captive. But obviously, it's starting with the deadly wound. But Ellen White also marks the rise of the United States at this time. So to try to say, which date it is in 1798, I think is rather difficult because there's a lot of events that occur. But she says the United States was arising at this time. And we know the United States, for the first time, had a navy and were also recognized by the other nations as an independent nation. Or, not all nations, but many nations in 1798 or by 1798. And we know that this is the start of a reform line. And of course, we have this period of darkness. And I'm going to address some of these details as we go through this in building this reform line. Now, also we know that this is the year that Miller receives his concordance. But he is not a Christian, he is a deist, which means he believes that, God may have created things, but we can't know anything about him, and that he's not interested in what happens on earth. But he wasn't an atheist. That is, he couldn't reason, that some kind of being doesn't exist, that things just came about through naturalism. He obviously believed, being a deist, he believes in God, but just doesn't believe that God cares or is interested in humanity. So it's kind of an impersonal God, impersonal being of some sort. Even with a deist, it may not be a personal being. It's some kind of mind, maybe. So there's lots of different views that deists could have. But in this time, it was pretty much just the belief that God wasn't interested in humanity. So he receives his concordance here. Now, we always say that we have then an increase of light. So we have an increase of light or an increase of knowledge. I always like to use light, but an increase of knowledge just because we have darkness and then we have light. Now, we can't say that the first angel's message was being proclaimed in 1798. Now, where Ellen White's going to place it, as we said, she's going to place it at August 11th, 1840. And I'm saying that by implication, not that she explicitly says August 11th, 1840 is the start of this period of the first angel's message. But we know that the first angel's message is empowered here. And there's a lot of symbolic representation about this date, because the year-day principle is what is established here. And so we know that this is where the impetus was added to the movement. So obviously the movement existed before, which means the first angel's message had to have occurred before. And we know with Miller, it's from 1818, after 2 years of study. So in 1814, he was at the Battle of Lake Champlain, where he had a bomb explode near him. He also saw God's hand in having the Americans defeat the British. And then it was 2 years later, in 1816, that they were going to have a ball commemorating this battle. The Battle of Plattsburgh is also what it's referred to as, that they were going to commemorate this battle, but they had a preacher come in, and this preacher presented a message that they decided not to even have the ball. So they continued to study. Now, so he then was really open to study from that. He was convicted. And the date in 1814 was September 11th, the Battle of Plattsburgh. And the day that that preacher came in, was in 1816, and they were commemorating this event that happened 2 years earlier on September 11th. So it's September 11th, 1816. So we don't know exactly in 1818 when he came to his conclusion, but we know that he came to that conclusion that said in about 25 years, which marks 1843, that this world would be wrapped up. And so this obviously becomes an important period of time symbolically. We see that 25 days is going to apply in this history as well, because it's the number of days between midnight and the midnight cry. And there's other symbolism in this as well. So this is what's happening in this first angel's message. So he has this concordance, but it's really not till 1816 that he really starts studying. And in 1818, he now makes this prediction. But there's still going to be this period of time before this message here is empowered. Now, we talk sometimes about, the formalization of the message, and we would have always looked at the formalization happening here from 31 to 33. 31 is when he first begins to preach, and 33 is when he becomes a minister. And I believe he also publishes some of his notes here even before then, but I can't remember the details on the publishing of his notes. So he had some publications, and I know that Josiah Litch had a copy of those notes, and so did Joshua V. Himes. They originally had some of his notes, and it was Himes who really suggested that they do more publications and so forth that we're going to see happening in this history. So, we would say that we would now call this the increase of knowledge. So they go like IOK, something like that. And then we would call this, the first angel is formalized. So there's this formalization of the message that happens here. So you have this light, but this message is not, he understands it, and he might have shared it with the odd number of people. And people know that he's studying this, but he doesn't begin to share it till here. And then, of course, it's not going to be empowered till here. So we'll see this as we go through. So I know this is a lot of review for people. At least I would hope it is. Oops, it's not the right screen. There we go. But maybe there's little bits of detail that we've missed. Now, a part of what she's talking about here, and I'm going to kind of skip it, but the context in which this was occurring was missionary activity began to occur in this period. So we have the establishment of Bible societies that happened after 1798. And Americans start to become even more biblically literate because of the availability of Bibles. And even though they were always, to some degree, a religious people, I would think you would see the height of American Christianity or Protestantism in the mid-1800s. You have also lots of different groups arising with particular views and doctrines. I know that I had my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Jonathan Ward, who came from England, actually before the Mayflower, when he was a young man. He was baptized when he was 100 years old into a religious group called the Christian Church. And that would be similar to the Christian Connection, the group that James White had been a part of. So, so there's lots of religious groups with different views, a lot of confusion to some degree within Christianity because of all these different religious groups. So she says, to William Miller and his co-laborers, it was given to preach the message in America, and the light kindled by their labors shone out to distant lands. So the testimony of the scriptures pointing to the coming of Christ in 1843 awakened widespread interest. Many were convinced that the arguments from the prophetic periods were correct, and sacrificing their opinion, they joyfully received the truth. So here she's picking it up basically in 1840. She's not going back in this part over that earlier history of Miller, which she does in the Great Controversy. And she's going to talk here about the people flocking to the meetings. The second column, the last paragraph, all classes flocked to the Adventist meetings, rich and poor, high and low, were from various causes, anxious to hear for themselves the doctrine of the Second Advent. And so this is the point that many of the churches were not focused upon the second coming of Christ. They believed that the world was getting better. You know, we've always heard this idea, and this is obviously true. And then in the next paragraph here at the first column, the proclamation of a definite time for Christ's coming called forth great opposition from many of all classes. So this great opposition really never began until about 42. Prior to that, especially, you know, when it's a long way off, ministers of the different denominations that he would preach at, they just saw the fact that many people were coming to church who weren't. And of course, they got many more offerings because of that. So there was sort of this idea, it's a religious awakening. Anything that's going to cause people to come to church and support the churches financially was accepted. So this idea of no man knoweth the day or the hour that she talks about here, this really didn't come much until much later. There was obviously some opposition, some people who were opposed to it, but really prior to 1842, Adventists and Miller, he was widely accepted to come in and preach at these different churches. And one is because he would come and preach and he would be gone. It's not like he would take people with him, or that they would be following this other movement and not supporting their local church. But as the movement began to formalize and organize, obviously that changed, and especially with the publication of the chart. Another paragraph here is the second column, the one there where it says angels of God. And this one's an interesting paragraph. Angels of God were watching with deepest interest the result of the warning. When the churches as a body rejected the message, angels turned away from them in sadness. Yet there were in the churches many who had not yet been tested in regard to the Advent truth. Many were deceived by husbands, wives, parents, or children, and were made to believe in a sin. Made to believe it a sin, even to listen to such heresies as were taught by the Adventists. Angels were bidden to keep faithful watch over these souls, for another light was yet to shine upon them from the throne of God. Now, there's a lot about this. We had studied in Spiritual Gifts. Ellen White has illustrations of the first and second angels' messages with these lights. Some of you may be familiar with that. And there was much made about this in our, was in 2018 when this was presented, prior to the November 9th prediction being introduced. And I understand now the interpretation that was being put upon those passages. It was this idea of this group of people who are being selected. So there's a misapplication of that. And some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you don't. But we had this presentation on this illustration. And I suggest that people look at that in Spiritual Gifts, where she talks about that, this illustration of the Advent movement. And it probably even would have been a good place to start this study, to go through that. So the first and second angels' messages came, but there were some people that we can see here that had not received light, and yet these are people who, it doesn't say that they're, necessarily righteous people, but there's people who had not received this warning. They were deceived in some way. And so we know that as God is dealing with people, he's dealing fairly and justly. But the other point about the angels of God watching with deepest interest, the result of the warning. The angels themselves don't know what's going to happen other than what's revealed in prophecy, what they can study. To see actually how things are going to turn out, they're observers as much as we are. They know what God's promises are, but they're still interested in watching these events. And I would think that they're now watching with deepest interest in what's going to happen with this next warning that we're going to be giving. And now this, of course, is an important paragraph here in the second column. I'm just getting it up to here a bit higher. God designed to prove his people. His hand covered a mistake in the reckoning of the prophetic periods. Adventists did not discover the error, nor was it discovered by the most learned of their opponents. The latter said, your reckoning of the prophetic periods is correct. To some great event is about to take place, but it is not what Miller predicts. It is the conversion of the world and not the second advent of Christ. Now, this is a really interesting paragraph. So we all know about God holding his hand over this mistake. But when you look at what the arguments were that other people were making, and I bring this up in the context of time setting, I've asked people this question. People say we cannot set dates. And they use some arguments, and they'll use arguments like no man knoweth the day or the hour, and some other statements that were made in the New Testament regarding the end of the world. And they don't recognize that they're actually making an argument against Millerism, because if that is true, that no man knoweth the day or the hour, and somebody then is using that argument against William Miller, you would then have to say that person was justified, because William Miller could not know the time of Jesus' second advent, according to the arguments that people are using. That no man knows the day or the hour, we can't know it. So Miller could not have known it, and anybody who opposed him on that basis would have had just grounds for opposing him. Now, so if that was true, Miller was the one in error, not these other people who opposed him. Now, Ellen White says other places that the thing is they had no interest in the second coming. So that's another argument. It's a different argument. Doesn't really matter whether they had an interest or not. If they're using this biblical argument why you can't know the time of the second advent, then we would have to say that they were correct. Whether their motives are kind of irrelevant in this context, because there may be people who wanted to see Jesus come back, but just honestly believe that no man knows the day or the hour, so Miller must be wrong. And you could make that case. So this idea that your reckoning of the prophetic periods is correct, but some great event is about to take place, but is not what Mr. Miller thinks. It's not going to be the second advent. People have been making this argument to me as well regarding July 18th, 2020, that the event that we're expecting is the wrong event. And it doesn't matter to me if that's the case, if I get the event wrong. The point is the chronology is correct, but many people argue against the chronology. They say the chronology cannot be correct because you can't know those things. What I do know is the chronology is correct, just as the reckoning of the prophetic periods was correct in Miller's time. As far as what's going to happen, I believe that Nashville will be attacked by a nuclear bomb, by Islam, and that Russia will be involved. But I could be wrong. But it doesn't mean that the reckoning of the prophetic periods or the chronology is incorrect. So now she says, the time of expectation passed and Christ did not appear for the deliverance of his people. Those who with sincere faith and love had looked for their Savior experienced a bitter disappointment. Now when she's talking about this time that's passed here, she's not talking about October 22nd, 1844. So what do you think she's talking about, that the time was past and they experienced a disappointment?
after April 18th.
Okay. Yeah, and this time passing here, I mean, we could actually look at lots of different disappointments. But, you know, obviously, even when the year 1843 ended, there were many people who left the movement. Many people who took that as, you know, Miller was saying 1843, when 1843 passed, people who had, you know, were somewhat convinced, some of them left the movement. And you could even say March 21st, because many people had marked that, because Miller had marked that March 21st, 1844. And there was also a disappointment in the fall of 1843. So, you know, if you're going to mark these disappointments, you could say that, you know, the fall of 1843, January 1st, 1844, March 21st, 1844. But ultimately, it was April 18th, but we'll say April 19th, 1843, that this first angel's message has now completed its work. So by the time you get to April 19th, the expectation that Miller had for his prophetic periods had passed. And we see this in his May 2nd letter from 1844. And I should put 18. So I'm going to put 1844 here. Or maybe I'll do it this way, just so we have it illustrated back. So you have 1843, and I'll mark it like this. And so this is spring to spring, spring to spring. And it's going to be April 19th, 1844, that you're going to have what we would call the first disappointment. So you have this first disappointment on April 19th. Sunset, basically, on April 18th would technically be when you would mark it, but they didn't necessarily think of it that way. You know, sometimes they waited till midnight or even just till the next morning. So they weren't sure, even at this time, about how the day worked, how you were going to count the start of the next day. So obviously we have a lot more knowledge about it now. But back then there was differing opinions about when the day began and ended. So they had sunset, midnight, and morning, all those different options. So by the morning of April 19th, they would have known that the Jewish year 1843 had totally passed. Now we're going to look at some of their arguments that they were using, which I think becomes really interesting. So we have here, this is from the Signs of the Times, August 3rd, 1842. So this is, I didn't deal with a lot of the earlier stuff in here, just when their arguments were really well developed. And here he's going to sort of review, and I suggest people read these articles, but he sort of reviews the message at that point. He talks about Miller when the message first came about, and that, you know, now they're getting closer and closer to this. They're going to talk about a guy named Professor Stewart, who makes some arguments against Miller. And just a lot of what they're doing is basically they're being apologists for the message. So they're dealing with the arguments that were coming against this message and building their arguments to sort of defend their position. So there's lots in here. I'm not going to read all of this. So by 1842, you're going to have lots of opposition that's been coming in. They're concerned a lot about what they should be doing. And I find there's this interesting parallel when you look at what they're doing with their prediction on how and what they're analyzing. They're reviewing the past history, and then they're analyzing what their work is. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? So they're very organized in thinking through the implications of this message. It's not, it's not haphazard in any way. It's well organized, well thought out, and they continue to build their arguments. Well, here's one. So what is our duty? So I have to go back to the top of the page. Our duty is to preach the midnight cry, to show that nothing remains to be fulfilled in historical prophecy, but the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven, to raise the righteous dead and set up his everlasting kingdom, and to warn the church and the world to prepare for this as the next great event before us. The prophetic periods have nearly run out. The vials, the reels, he means the seals, the trumpets, and the signs of the times all indicate the near approach of the coming of the Son of Man, even at the doors. I could probably correct that. A lot of these typos that end up in here are because they've originally scanned the periodical, and sometimes the computer reads the wrong letter. So it probably was originally did say seals. We shall therefore, in connection with our respected colleagues, continue to lecture on this subject. We shall sound the alarm in God's holy mountain. We shall publish more extensively and scatter our publications more profusely than ever. We shall hold public meetings and by every effort in our power, endeavor to arouse the world to prepare for the coming of the bridegroom. More than this we cannot do, lest we dare not. Now it's interesting too that he calls this the midnight cry. And I talked about this point before, that the Millerites believed that they were giving the midnight cry, and they were using the parable of the 10 virgins. But it was, as you'll see, under Samuel Snow, that he gave what he called the true midnight cry. So this idea that they had this message, and I think this is a really important point. I don't know how many of you remember when we started to introduce the midnight cry as a symbol in our lines. Now, initially, here, I'll try to illustrate this here for people. So initially, our line looked something like this. We had 9/11, and this isn't initially, this is, once we had 9/11. And then we had the Sunday law, and we had the close of probation. So for a while, this is what the line looked like. We didn't have the midnight cry. But then what happened is we ended up with this midnight cry that showed up. Now, in trying to understand how that occurred, Elder Jeff recognized that the Millerites believed that they were giving the midnight cry. And that you could take Millerite history here, I guess we line it up like this, and you could put this as April 19th, though even back then, Jeff was still saying March 21st. So I'm actually going to put that, because we didn't understand that there. Because Elder Jeff taught for a long time it was March 21st, 1844, that the Jewish year ended. So this is how the Millerites would have looked at it. They were going to be preaching this message. Now we think of the Sunday law as the close of probation. That's something, as we started to zoom in, we started to recognize this was the close of probation for Adventists. And I'm doing this wrong. I knew I was doing it wrong. That's how it goes. So this would be October 22nd, 1844. And this would be March 21st, 1844. And this would be, various things, but, you could put it August 11th, 1840, is I think how he would have lined it up. So March 21st. And so what you saw here in this history is this was Protestants and this was Millerites. So you had these two different groups. And then we came to recognize that this was SDAs and this was the world. Now, in this period here, then, we would see that there was this midnight cry that they believed that they had, but there was this actual midnight cry. So we're going to call this the midnight cry, but this was the true midnight cry. And then what we did is we saw that we had a message here that would parallel the midnight cry, but this would be the loud cry. So we now had introduced from Millerite history the idea that we could put a midnight cry here. But then, and this happened gradually, so it didn't happen just like this. We might not have had a time when we actually drew this out exactly in this way, but this is how it developed over time. So then when we now put this midnight cry in, we zoomed out and we did, I'm just going to get rid of this. We did this. We now put the Sunday law here, and we lined the Sunday law up with October 22nd, 1844. We still had 9/11 here, but now we're going to have the midnight cry here. We still don't have midnight, but we have the midnight cry. And that's what this is it's taking this history and bringing it up like this. But then it's paralleling not with this line, but with this line. So we now bring this up here. So this parallels October 22nd. And it was when we had this line, which would be about 2014, we still didn't have midnight. And then when we introduced midnight, which I'm going to go into more detail, I'm probably jumping ahead here. We put midnight cry over here. These were all like equal waymarks. And then we just put this little midnight here. So we'd have 9/11, midnight, midnight cry, the Sunday law. And this is how we understood it in 2016. We understood it that way. Now, we didn't realize at this time completely what a fractal was or how to understand this. We were starting to understand fractals. It was introduced by one of the students. So they were starting to develop this, but we didn't have the separate lines of the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinim. And so there was a confusion regarding this line and how to fit this in. But you can see you're taking this smaller line here, and you're just seeing that there's this parallel, the midnight cry and the loud cry. So now when we do this here and we deal with this part of this line, this is our line. Now, of course, we're still going to have a loud cry and a close of probation and time of Jacob's trouble and the second coming over on this side. But this just becomes the primary line that we look at for Seventh-day Adventists. So this SDA line here is what we start to look at. So this is just blown up. We're zooming in here. And then eventually this becomes the line of the priests. And the Levites, they each have a line like this, right? So there becomes confusion regarding this part of it. But, and we will get to that. So later on, I want to deal with that. But the main point is here is that we have this midnight cry that is understood. So the Millerites believe in this history that this is the end, right? This Jewish year 1843, that this is the end, and they believe they're giving the midnight cry. So when they come here, they don't expect to see anything else, because to them, all of the prophetic periods end here. There's nothing else here. And that was why it was difficult for them to move on, because in their view, since the prophetic periods had come to the end, Jesus should have come back. So the problem would either be the prophetic periods were incorrect, or as Adventists did, the Seventh-day Adventists did, is that a different event happened than what we expected. Now, at first they, of course, just thought there was going to be a tarrying time. So we're going to see that when the second disappointment comes, this continues on and on. But initially, they just recognize that they're going to tarry, right? So there's going to be this tarrying time that happens from April 19th, 1844. And we're going to deal with that a little bit later on. But that's what's going to happen. So here we're still just dealing with the first angel's message and how they understood it. So their work is to give the midnight cry. That's what they believed that they were doing. They make a point here at this last paragraph in the second column. Okay, let's just read the paragraph before, because I think this is pertinent again to our time. And I just can't read this stuff and not think about where we're at. We tell our opponents once for all that the only way for them to stop this work is to take the Bible and disprove our theory and give us one in return which is more clear, harmonious, and scriptural than that we now advocate. Till this is done, we shall keep about our work. We shall appeal to the people, the common people, with whom the truth always resides. They have, and they will still hear us. But what, after all, if you should be mistaken? Well, if it will be of service to you, we will reason a little on this point. If we are mistaken in the time, the world still goes on after 1843. We shall have the satisfaction of having done our duty. Our publications are evangelical. They have and now are producing the most salutary effect upon the church and the world. Our lectures and public meetings produce the same glorious results. Can we ever regret that souls were converted, that the virgins were awakened and prepared to meet their Lord? If then we are mistaken about the time, what harm can result to the church or the world? So people have pressed me with this argument that I need to be concerned about my reputation, that if I preach a false date and it passes, then I will have looked silly, which I don't mind looking silly. But, you know, the bigger issue would be, even though we've done all this work and people might have been converted, many people might end up losing their faith. So if we're wrong about the time, many people will just cast off their belief in this. And they're not really addressing that part of it. They just think these souls are converted. But obviously there was this problem when time passed at the end of the Jewish year, 1843, that many people just fell away from Christianity altogether. They became scoffers and mockers. They didn't go back to being good Christians. And that's part of the problem with time setting, is it doesn't really have the effect to convert people. It, in and of itself, is a weak tool for conversion. It can create excitement, which in the case of the Millerites, it generally didn't. But there was a type of fear, and so many people left the movement and left Christianity when the time passed, shows that many people weren't actually converted at all. But I would say that, you know, in defense of that, I would say that obviously the people who really were converted still did continue following God and doing as much as they could as Christians. So they had a love of the truth. And not all people who fell away, let's say, in October 22nd, 1844, necessarily understood everything, but people still did maintain Christianity. We can't say that every single person who didn't accept, you know, the investigative judgment and the ideas that developed into Adventism were necessarily lost. We can't judge those individuals, but we can say in a general sense that people who rejected the light went into darkness, right? So we know that the vast majority of the people had gone into darkness. So, you know, somebody could argue that their movement was then a failure, but we know that it wasn't a failure. So the preaching of time, you have to give the warning. You have to do your duty. But the results really are left up to God. They're not left up to us. So he has the second point here. You will lose your influence, which is what I was talking about, your reputation. If you've done your duty and you've been honest, then, you know, your influence is what it is. You know, being wrong, you can be wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. The fault is when you're wrong and you don't admit you were wrong. And I think that that's an important part. But we also have to be aware that if we're wrong, we have to know what we were wrong about. So, you know, the Millerites continue to grow and learn. So even though they were wrong as regard to the event, and even here in 1843, they're wrong as regard to the time. So they weren't just wrong as regard to the event. They were wrong to the time, because it really was October 22nd, 1844. where we get to the great disappointment. And, and people will bring this up, people are going to laugh at you and, all these types of things. I don't think I really would care about that. One is I've just never had I've never cared about that even when I was younger. So I don't think I would care about it now that I'm older. But I would be much more concerned about what God would think than what man thinks. And there's another point here that's important. The question is, but what, after all, if we should be right? And of course, this is a much more appropriate question that people should be asking themselves. Anytime that somebody's making a prediction, you need to look at the evidences and weigh it on the evidences itself. Because obviously, as we approach the second coming of Christ, God is going to be giving us light. And there's so much about this message that we know is light. So obviously, we can't believe that everything is wrong. So people who are not really interested in looking into the truth, they're the ones that are actually in the greater danger. Their arguments of, what if you're wrong? All these types of things really they would be the arguments of an infidel, really. They would not be the arguments of a Christian. And what will become of skeptical and backsliding members of the church? They must be cut off from the wicked, cut off with the wicked. Now, in our case of our prediction here, July 18th, 2020, we're not looking that this is a test for the world or even for the Levites. That is, people don't have to accept July 18th, 2020 before July 18th, 2020 in order to be saved. We're making this prediction ahead of time to be a witness to the truthfulness of our message, which is really about the coming Sunday law. So even though we have this prediction about July 18th, it's about the coming Sunday law and the test that Adventists have to face. And so we're looking at this prediction as evidence that we are correct in our understanding of how we look at prophecy. So it's really, the issue isn't about July 18th. So there are some differences in the context of our message. But anybody who wants to know Christ should be seeking to study God's word. So a very interesting article by Joshua V. Himes outlining where they were in 1842. Now, here we're getting to a synopsis of Miller's views. This is, I've done this study with people before. It's a pretty interesting study. I'm not going to go through it, but you're going to see that he's going to have all these different proofs of why he believes that Jesus is coming at the end, that in the Jewish year 1843. And this synopsis was printed other times too. So this is a reprint of these arguments as you're getting into the year 1843. They're laying them down. I think I went through these in a meeting at the School of the Prophets, if I remember correctly, or somewhere. Might have been actually a worship. And where's the one I want to show you? Oh yeah, so it's proof number 13. I believe God has revealed the time. And well, let's just read his verses here. He takes Isaiah 50, that would be Isaiah 64, verse 7 and 8. No, that would be Isaiah 44, verse 7 and 8. 50 minus 10 is 40, 44. And Isaiah 45, verse 20 and 21. And who as I shall call and shall declare it, and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show unto them. Assemble yourselves and come, draw near together, ye that are escaped of the nations, that have no knowledge, that set up the wood of their graven image, and pray unto their God that they cannot save. Tell ye and bring them near, yea, and let them take counsel together. Who hath declared this from ancient time? Who hath told it from that time? Have not I the Lord, and there is no God else besides me? A just God and a Savior. There is none besides me. And Daniel 12:10. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And Amos 3:7. Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets. And First Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 4. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. And I want to just show you here that it's interesting how Miller makes his arguments. That, he's doing what we would call proof texting. And some of these texts are really taken out of context. He's using verses in a way that if you looked at the verses and studied them independently, you wouldn't draw the conclusions that he's using. And this is the same thing the Apostle Paul does in the book of Hebrews. If you read Hebrews chapter 1, he gives you the same type of proof texts to show that Jesus is the Son of God. If you look at all the verses, none of them are referring to the Son of God or the Messiah in their context, but we apply them that way. Now, I bring this up in how we study things here because there was a lot made about methodology. And the methodology that was then introduced, first we were talking about proof texting, but then they introduced this methodology that the lines control everything and that we have to understand the lines. And eventually we rejected plain statements of Scripture based upon the lines. And what they were using was a dispensational argument. Now, if we were to do this, the whole foundation of Adventism would crumble, because Adventism is based upon a thus saith the Lord and upon proof texting. And even our modern scholarship has rejected proof texting. Now, when I say proof texting, there's a type of proof texting that is faulty, and people will just take verses. It's not just that they're out of context, but they're applying them in a way that's inconsistent with the plain statements of Scripture. Always, when you're studying the Bible, no matter what you're doing, nothing you believe can contradict a plain statement or teaching of Scripture. You can get insight into things by studying in this way, but you can't override something that's clearly stated in inspiration, that's clearly taught in the Bible. And we always need a thus saith the Lord. To say that a thus saith the Lord is then spiritualism, that we're somehow worshiping the Bible. I grew up with that type of teaching. So when I would say to my dad, the Bible says, he was basically arguing that you're putting, man's word over God's word. That's the way he would put it. Because the Holy Spirit is the one that speaks to us in his thinking. So I grew up with this idea that something can supersede the plain statements of Scripture. In this case, it was the impressions that my dad had regarding what he believed. Putting the lines in that place is no different. Really, following the lines that man has constructed and ignoring the plain word of Scripture is spiritualism in and of itself. So anyway, I would ask that people go through these proofs and look at the arguments that he uses. Now, another one here that I wanted to look at, I think it was, dealing with, and you can see this here, it's right at the top. Number 14. I believe the time can be known by all who desire to understand and be ready for his coming. And I am fully convinced that sometime between March 21st, 1843 and March 21st, 1844, according to the Jewish mode of computation of time, Christ will come and bring all his saints with him, and that then he will reward every man and his work shall be. So actually, I think this is the first printing of these proofs, because this is in January of 1843, and it was in December of 1842 that Miller first presented the idea that the Jewish year 1843 did not go from January 1st, 1843 to December 31st, 1843, but it went from March 21st to March 21st. And it's this statement that Jeff was using for years to deal with the Jewish year 1843, and that many Adventists would have. So they would say March 21st to March 21st. Now, this is an argument that it's from equinox, or the spring equinox to the spring equinox. And this reminds me very much of Ussher's understanding that the year went from the equinox in the fall, the autumnal equinox, to the autumnal equinox before the Exodus, and that it moved to the spring equinox at the time of the Exodus. I think maybe that's a little bit implied that it moved there, but he seems to think that because he does not believe that the Jews observed a lunar solar calendar until the Babylonian captivity, that they inherited that from their captors who had brought them to Babylon. And I don't think that that's correct. I think Ussher was incorrect there. But I think that Miller is using this type of calendar here at this point. He's not really totally aware of the Jewish calendar and how it operates. It wouldn't be very common knowledge for a Christian back then to understand these calendars. What we sort of now take for granted, even the limited understanding we have, would not have been in the realm of understanding of very many people at this time. It was something that was really specialists. Somebody who had a real interest in calendars might have some idea about how the Jewish calendar worked, but most people didn't, and Miller did not. So just choosing March 21st, he's just using, that's the start of the year. And so he would have believed probably that the Passover was just 15 days after March 21st or something like that. He wouldn't have thought about how the new moon was used. But it's not certain, exactly, because he doesn't deal with this in detail. But I'm just thinking, based on the fact he used that March 21st to March 21st, means that he probably didn't understand when the Jewish year was. Later on, they did. So they now started to understand that it was going to be based upon the observance of the first visible crescent. The interesting thing is, in 1844, March 21st is the first day of the first month, according to the rabbinic reckoning. So it just happens to fall on the spring equinox in 1844. And if he had looked at some kind of farmer's almanac or some kind of chart or something, he might have seen that March 21st, 1844 was the end of the Jewish year, 1843. And so you might have assumed then that March 21st would be the beginning of it. But it wasn't, because the Jewish year is not 365 days long. And I think it was April 2nd or April 1st in 1843 that the year began. So it's about 10 or 11 days different. So we can see here that there's this idea that he has for the prophetic periods. And he's going to go through, and this is the one I need to read. So he's going to deal with the 2520 here. So let's look at this. First, I prove it by this time given by Moses in the 26th chapter of Leviticus, being 7 times that the people of God are to be in bondage to the kingdoms of this world, or in Babylon, literal and mystical, which 7 times cannot be understood less than 7 times. 360 revolutions of the earth in its orbit, making 2520 years. So, in trying to understand this, obviously 360 revolutions of the earth in its orbit, I'm not sure what he means by revolutions. So, just to sort of in trying to understand how astronomers look at things, we go around the sun, which we really don't, but we picture it this way, that we go around the sun, and we would call that a revolution. And then we would talk about the rotation of the earth. So the rotation of the earth is different than the revolution. The earth doesn't It revolves around the sun, but it rotates around its axis. And so he says here, 7 times cannot be understood less than 7 times 360 revolutions. So I'm not sure what he means by, because that's 25, 20 years. So you're taking 7 times, which is years, and you're multiplying not by 360 revolutions. So I'm not sure what he means by that statement, but making 25, 20 years. So obviously we're using a prophetic year of 360 days, not a year of 365 days or 365 and a quarter to do this calculation. So we're taking a day for a year. So 7 times 360 equals 25, 20 days. And we're now applying a day for a year. But he doesn't really say that. And I'm not sure how well he thought out some of his arguments in the way that he presented them. Because I don't think that people had a problem. That is, people weren't as particular about some of the things that we get particular about when we're putting out our arguments, the points that people will attack. So we know, for instance, that the enemies did not attack him for discounting in his calculations that there was no 0 year. He just didn't ignore that. He ignored that fact that there was no 0 year and did his math as if there was. But yet his opponents never noticed this. And so I think that it has a lot to do with the way that people thought at that time. They're thinking about these things. They just never considered it. We now consider these things because we've, as Seventh-day Adventists, had to deal with these arguments that were later brought up, but they were brought up after the Millerite movement had passed. Now, he's also going to refer us to Isaiah 7, the 65-year prophecy. And this is an important point, too, to understand how Miller looked at this prophecy. And I will cause them, where is it here? For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Reason. And within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. When Manasseh was carried captive to Babylon, and Israel was no more a nation. And he says, see chronology. So he has chronology attached to these notes. 2 Chronicles 33, 11, or verse 9 here, starts on. So Manasseh made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to err and to do worse than the heathen whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel. The 677th year BC then takes 677 out of 250, leaves AD 1843, when the punishment of the people of God will end. So now, of course, he's not doing a long treatise here, he's doing a summary. But even in how he words this, saying the 677th year BC, he's recognizing there that that's an ordinal count. And if he was thinking about it, he would realize that he would have to take 676 out of 2520, because the math has a 0, ordinal counts do not. And it's true. When we go 677 BC, it's the 677th year. So I'm going to deal with this point here. I'll try to illustrate this, because I know lots of people do not understand it. Now, I do have a paper about the full year, no 0 year issue, but I'll kind of try to illustrate it here. So this is 1 BC, and this is 1 AD. So this is obviously 2 AD, 3 AD, 2 BC, 3 BC. Now, just simply, if I'm going to say, I'm going to subtract 1 BC, I'm going to go 1 year. I'm going to start here. Let's say I start January 1st, 1 BC, and I go to January 1st, 1 AD. If I was going to add these two together, 1 BC plus 1 AD, I would get this answer, 2 years. But we would see it would only be 1 year, because every time I subtract or add, I have a 0 here, but there is no 0 here. So to compensate for that, I have to, if I'm adding, I have to then subtract 1 to get 1 year. So the same thing here. If I was going to go 3 BC, so I'm going to go from here, January 1st, 3 BC, to January 1st, 3 AD, I would, or anywhere. Let's say I'm just going to go from the middle of this year to the middle of this year. Now, if I counted here, you would see I'm going to be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And if this was, you know, the year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we would easily see if I'm going from 1 to 6 that that would be 5 years. But when we're trying to visualize this, if I go 3 BC plus 3 AD, that's going to give me 6 AD. But I have to subtract 1 to get the 5. Now, if I was subtracting 3 BC from, let's say, we'll just do it so it makes more sense. So I'm going to go from 3 BC to 2 AD. Well, I wouldn't do it this way. I would do something like this. I would go 3 BC minus 4 years. So obviously I'm going to end up with a minus sign. So maybe I'll do this differently. It's just so you're not confused by it, because that minus will confuse people. So I'm going to go, let's say, from 1 BC, and I'm going to, we'll do it this way. 1 AD, do 2 AD, that'll be better. 2 AD, and we're going to go 5 years back. So now I'm going to subtract 5 years from 2 AD. So if I'm going to do this, you know, I could just, on this line, I could easily count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to bring, I'm going to need 4 BC over here. So I'm going to take 2 minus 5 years. 2 AD minus 5 years is going to give me minus 3 years. Or minus 3 BC is how I would look at it. But I have to now add 1 because the math has a 0, but this doesn't. So when I'm subtracting BC and AD, I have to add 1 to get 4 years difference. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, see, I didn't even need this. I was doing that wrong. So it'd be 4 years difference. So if I'm going, I'm doing this wrong. So I'm confusing myself here. So if I'm going to go 2 AD and I go 5 years, that's what I did wrong. Okay, 5 minus 2 minus 5. Let's do it the other way around. 5 years at 2 AD. So I'm going to be subtracting 5 minus 2, which gives me 3, plus 1 equals 4 years. There we go. So that would bring me to 4 BC. This isn't the easiest way. It's easier to do it with big numbers than looking here, but here we can see, we can easily count. So if I'm going to be at 2 years, and I'm going to 2 AD, and I'm going to go 5 years back, 1, 2, it's going to bring me to 4 BC. Yeah, I did it right the first time. I just didn't think it made sense to people. So you can see I have to add 1 because I subtracted. And that's just a simple way you do it. So if you're going to do 2,300 days, and you're going to take 457 BC, you would come to 1843, but you would have to add 1 to get 1844. Now, the point is that the Millerites didn't recognize this mistake for quite a long time. And I've tried to figure it out from their writings, and the nearest that I can figure is that they started to understand this after they made the chart in May of 1843 or 42. So this would be in 1842, that they first start to even get a glimpse of this, and this is later on in 1842, that they start to recognize that they made a mistake in the reckoning of the prophetic periods, and they adjust it. Now, the way that they adjust it is interesting. Now, some people talk about the fullness of the year mistake, and I don't like that, because you never see it in the Millerite writings that they talk about the fullness of the year mistake. But what this argument was is that the mistake that happened in 1843 wasn't about the fact that there was no 0 year, because they had already recognized that. But to call it the fullness of the year mistake, they already had recognized about the fullness of the year. So that wasn't really a mistake in 1844. So on April 19th, 1844, by that time, they already understood there was no 0 year. They already understood, too, that they had to count full years. And the way that they did this, I guess I could have left this up here, but they just deal with this idea of BC 1 and AD 1. And they just say, well, in order to go from here to here, you're going to have to go a full year. Now, of course, we always counted full years. It was never an issue when we weren't going between BC and AD. When we count years AD, nobody ever had a problem with, August 11th, 1840. Well, you're going to count full years to get, from July 27th, 1299 to July 27th, 1840 is going to be, that would be 451 full years, right? So you're adding 541 full years. 541 full years, you're adding 150 to 391, and you're going to count full years. You're not going to have that problem. But if they had tried to apply their math, and the 391 years had been in a BC date starting, they would not have accounted for that in 1840. They wouldn't have recognized that there was a 0 in their math, but there wasn't a 0 in the calendar. And part of the problem is some chronologists did have years with zeros in it. So there was this chronologist Hales, Dr. Hales, and in his chronology, or maybe it's in Perdoe's, there's one of these chronologists anyway, he had a 0 in it because he was an astronomer, and in astronomy, they put the 0 year in there. And that really confused Samuel Snow later on, as we will see when we get there. So this idea of BC AD was a real problem. Now, we're going to see this show up in another presentation of Miller's. I'm going to make this a little smaller so I can look at these pages easier, and then I'll just blow it back up. Now, this is Apollos Hale, not to be confused with Dr. Hale. And the Second Advent Manual is, Apollos Hale did a very good summary of all the different positions that we have, that the Millerites had. And it's going to be here, so I'm just kind of skipping to some of the things I talked about earlier. So if you look the second paragraph down on the third column, the supposition has been named that the addition of 153 years to the age of the world must arrange the whole matter of the prophetic times by throwing the date of events into confusion. And he does this illustration of how it doesn't affect anything. The point is here, I didn't share the screen. Yes, so this is here, the supposition, so right at the beginning. So this 153 years that I talked about, and that I didn't share properly. Sorry about that. Click there. Okay, now it's going to be there. In the following diagram, B represents the time from Adam to Joshua, and C is the time from Samuel to Christ. DD represents the period of the judges, according to the shorter calculation, and EE the same period, according to the longer calculation. So he's showing here that the difference of 153 years is in the period of the judges. He says the period from Samuel to Christ is no more according to one calculation of the period of the judges than the other. And all the intermediate periods or dates between Samuel and Christ stand related to each other exactly alike, according to either computation of the period of the judges. Now, all the prophetic periods involved in Mr. Miller's theory begin after Samuel. So the addition of 153 years before his time only affects the relation of the events in the two grand sections of time which lie before and after the judges to each other. That is, it makes the time from Adam to Christ or from Moses to Christ 153 years longer. But as the prophetic periods all begin this side of Samuel, they are not affected by the addition. So he makes this argument. Now, I understand, once I had worked through the chronology that's in the Bible, that it actually is important how you connect to these periods of time, because he's just considering the prophetic periods themselves and the 6,000 years. But it definitely does affect a whole bunch of other periods. If I was to take the position that the period of the judges was longer, it would affect the 430 years or the 480 years of 1 Kings 6 verse 1. And it doesn't seem that Miller ever considers that verse in anything that I looked at. And the way that people deal with that is various. Some people just say it's just something added later. Some people argue that they don't count some of the periods of time, which doesn't really make any sense, because why would you have a span of time if it doesn't mean anything? And 480 doesn't have any symbolism that I know of that they would use. So anyway, that's just dealing with the fact that they have this 153 years that I talked about earlier. He's going to deal with the prophetic years as well, and as solar years and how they relate to each other. And there's another point, which I don't think is in this paper. I don't see it here anyway. Now, this paper here, the probability of the second coming of Christ about AD 1843. Now, some interesting things about Josiah Litch. He initially was very excited about Miller's prophecies, but he struggled at times from when he first heard about them. But he wrote this book early on, and of course we know that this is important because this is where he's going to present his argument for the end of the 391 years and 15 days, though he doesn't nail it down to the day. And I would recommend that people read these arguments as well. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to try to find one section in here. Again, I'm going to try to, I got to shrink it so I can look at the whole page here on this computer. Yeah, so it's here. So we'll just read this paragraph. So it's talking about Turkey, and it says, it was given them after the rise of the Ottoman Empire to torment or harass and weaken men, talking about the Roman Empire of the East, 5 months. And that's too big. And if these prophetic months, as is probable, it would be 150 years. But when did that empire rise? Mr. Miller has fixed on AD 1298, others among whom is Gibbon in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, 1299. He says Othman first invaded the territory of Nicomedia on the 27th of July, 1299. He also remarks on the singular accuracy of the date, a circumstance not often found in the history of those times. He says the singular accuracy with which this even is given seems to indicate some foresight in the rapid growth of the monster. So if we date the origin of the empire in 1299, the 150 years would end in 1449. During that length of time, the Eastern Empire of Rome was harassed beyond measure by the Ottoman power, but was not subjected entirely to it. In the year 448, Amurath, the Turkish Sultan, besieged Korea, one of the strongest cities in the Roman Empire, and the end of the 5 months would come the next year. We should naturally look for some defeat of the Christian emperor's army, but was it so far from it, that after a long summer siege and a great loss of men, the fall coming on and the rain setting in, the Turks raised the siege and retired. The empire was now left in peace. One would almost be inclined to think the word of prophecy must now fail. But the time came, and the word of God was confirmed by the event. John Palaeologos, emperor of Constantinople, was dead, and his brother Constantine the 11th, who is here he says Diacozes, which is a typo. His name is Dracozes. He's Constantine the 11th Dracozes. And it's interesting because I've researched this, the actual paper where he would have got this information from. So it's from Hawkins' Ottoman Empire, page 113. And it doesn't say Diacozes, it says Dracozes. But in those days, what you would get often is you wouldn't get a whole book. You might get called a review. And in these reviews, they would print out large sections of books. And it's possible that he actually got this from a review and that they had this typo in there, Diacozes. And that typo has continued on into Adventism. Now, Ellen White actually quotes this Diacozes when she quotes Josiah Litch. She doesn't correct it, but it's very obvious that, it could have been corrected by her if she had chosen to. She just quotes what he says, but it was actually Dracozes. And so he's Constantine the 11th. He's the last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. So he talks about this here. It happened in AD 1449. This shameful proceeding seemed to presage the approaching downfall of the empire. Ducas the historian counts John Palaeologos for the last Greek emperor without doubt because he did not consider as such a prince who had not dared to reign without the permission of his enemy. Gibbon, an infidel, is so struck with the singular accuracy of the record of the origin of this empire that he attributes it to some foresight in the historian of the rapid growth of the monster, which I had read before. He had talked about that before. So anyway, he talks here that the sixth trumpet began to sound there. Now, this is, of course, his 1838 writing of it. When you get to the last paragraph in the second column, he says, "But when will this power be overthrown? According to the calculations already made, that the 5 months ended in 1449, the hour, 15 days, the day, 1 year, the month, 30 years, and the year, 360 years in all, 391 years and 15 days will end in AD 1840, sometime in the month of August. The prophecy is the most remarkable and definite, even descending to the days, of any in the Bible relating to these great events." So it's interesting that here he doesn't address, because he could have done the calculation here. He could have started at July 27th, said it's July 27th, 1840, and counted the days and come to August 11th. But he doesn't do that for 2 more years. And I think that's interesting. So I have some theories about it, but I can't prove it. But I have tried to work out other ways that he could have tried to make this calculation. And I think that initially he wasn't sure how to make the calculation, because Josiah Litch would have been aware that July 27th, 1299 was on a Julian calendar. So I don't know how I'm going to illustrate this, but I'll try. So obviously you have here July 27th, 1299. And I've done this to some degree in other presentations. And you go July 27th, 1449. Now, so he's counting from here. So he's going to do the hour, the day, the month, and the year. And in this time, he does it like hour, day, month, year. So he does it in the order that it's given. And so he knows it's 391 years and 15 days. But he doesn't count this and come to August 11th, 1840, because he would have a problem, and I think he would have known about it. So in America, they had changed from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar in 1752. And Josiah Litch would have had grandparents who would have had 2 birthdays. That is, he would have known that there was this change in calendars that happened in 1752. And this is only about, it's less than 100 years, less than 90 years, it's 88 years from when the calendar had changed. And it would have been 86 years in 1838. So he would have known people in his life who had been born with a different year. So he might have known some grandparents. He might have known, even though they would have been really old in 1838, but maybe when he was a child, he would have known. But there still might be people living in his day who actually were born on a different calendar. So they would have been born on the Julian calendar. So he would have known about this. But if he was going to make this calculation, there would be a problem. Because here, so I just have these dates up top here, but really, this is a Julian date. The Gregorian date would be August 3rd. So I'm going to put July 27th down here. So now I'm going to put the Julian dates down here. Now, of course, he could have gone from July 27th here to July 27th Julian. Now, if he had done that, we know that this is the 26th day of the 4th month. For those of you who have studied this on the biblical calendar, this would not have been the 26th day of the 4th month if he had gone to the Julian date. And that's what he would have done, is he would have counted 150 years, 5 months, from here to here. But he has here a Julian date as well, and this is August 3rd. But this one here is August, I have to count that in my head, so 27, that'd be 9. So I'd have to add 9 to that, so. Yes, this would have been August 5th, I think. So it would have been August 5th, 1449, would have been the 26th day of the 4th month. Or pardon me, don't do it that way. So this would have been August 5th if this was July 27th, and I would have had to add 9 days to the 26th day of the 4th month. So the biblical date would have been 26, 27. This would have been the 6th day of the 5th month if I had done the biblical calendar. So this is what he could have done, is he could have said, he could have started here and counted 15 days from August 3rd, or he could have started here and counted 15 days from August 5th, or he could have transferred that all over to here and counted 12 days. So he had 3 different choices. I know that doesn't really make sense to everyone, but he had these choices that he could make regarding the calendar, because here, if he had taken the Julian date, July 27th, it would have been August 8th. So it was August 3rd here, August 5th here, and August 8th here. That would have been the Julian date. So if I had put the July 27th here, again, it would have been a different day on the biblical calendar, but it would have been August 8th. And so he had these 3 different choices if he had thought about it. Now, I'm not sure that he did, but I think he may initially have recognized the problem, and that's why he didn't count the 15 days. But as he got closer to the event, I think he then recognized that he could just use the Julian symbol. So he could just count from July 27th Gregorian, count the 15 days, and ignore the fact that he passed from Julian to Gregorian. Now, we know if we use the biblical one, this would be the 26th day of the 4th month. And if I continue following it, this would be July 18th, the 26th day of the fourth month. That was also July 27th. So this would be a Gregorian date, but he would not have thought of using this calendar to count this. So this was the thing that I noticed back in 2015, that if I use the biblical calendar, 1449 would be July 27th Gregorian, and I could count 391 days to July 27th Gregorian, or years, right? 391 years, and then have the 15 days at the end. And that's because I would recognize that this is also the 26th day of the fourth month. The problem here is this is July 15th. So the Julian date is changing, but the biblical date is staying the same. And so for me, this was evidence that God had led Josiah Litch in this calculation, because he could have come up with lots of different dates. He could have done it differently, but he didn't. But he didn't know about this. And then we also found that we could put the Julian dates, July 27th here for the 360 and the 30, and they would be the 26th day of the fourth month. So, we had more evidence that this structure was designed of God. And I've gone through this in other studies. But my point is that in 1838, when he's laying out his evidences, he could have done this calculation quite easily, but he didn't until he got to August 1st, 1840. Then he says it's going to be on the 11th. So I think that's kind of interesting how truth unfolds. And, and he couldn't, even in 1840, he wouldn't have known about the biblical calendar. So he couldn't have used this argument here. So the fact that he just skipped all of that and just chose this, sort of almost like a stab in the dark, I would think of it as, if I was doing it, it would be, I would know that there's this problem, but I'm just going to choose one of them and go with it. But he chose the right one. Whether he really understood what all of his choices were, I'm not certain. But definitely, he must have known there was a problem, or else he would have done it in 1838. So that's sort of my view on that part of it. We're going along pretty quick here. Or are we? No, we're going behind here. So we got, I put, so it's 10 to 1. So we probably should take a break. People need to have a break. So I'm going to pause this, and we're going to come back and finish this off. Dear Father in heaven, we just ask for your Spirit to be here again as we continue our study. Help us to understand the things we study. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So thanks everybody for coming back. And I illustrated during that break just this connection here. And I'm just going to go over it. So this is Josiah Litch's prophecy again. And we had the 26th day of the fourth month as this consistent symbol that we could use to mark July 27th Julian to July 18th Julian, from 1299 to 1449. Now, July 27th Gregorian lines up with July 18th Julian in 1449 as being the 26th day of the fourth month. And then we could go here in 1840 and see that July 27th Gregorian is also the 26th day of the fourth month. The Julian date here is significant, but it's not important in his calculation. If he had used the biblical calendar, he would have arrived at July 27th Gregorian, from which he counted his 15 days, to August 11th. But we had counted 0.5 of a year, which is 6 months, which is symbolically 180 years. And we recognized that if we went to the 26th day of the fourth month in 2020, it was July 18th. So we had this pairing of July 27th and July 18th, both marked with the 26th day of the fourth month, but here with a period of 6 months. Just like here, we have a period of 5 months with July 27th and July 18th, both Julian dates paired with the 26th day of the fourth month. So this was part of our argument for July 18th, 2020. So for anybody, and we have done other studies on this, this is probably the simplest way I've presented it. Maybe that makes more sense to people. But usually I go through more detail because there is a lot more detail there. Okay. Now, so we're going to look at his refinement of this on August 1st. So this is Signs of the Times, August 1st, 1840. So obviously, 2 years later, he's going to have a more precise prediction. And he's going to go through all of his arguments. Now, and they mark this as the end of the second woe, which it is. Now, they also had, when Josiah Litch and the Millerites were looking at these periods of the trumpets. So the fifth trumpet contains the first woe, but the start of the fifth trumpet was long before the start of the second woe. That is, the second woe, or the first woe, pardon me. The first woe ends the period of the fifth trumpet, but the period of the fifth trumpet is the period that starts, they had it start in 606 AD, and they had it end in 1299, or 1449, pardon me. So that in 1299, they have this 150-year period or 5 months period begin. And I've gone over this study, this prophecy in more detail. But the idea is that the trumpets and the woes, even though the woes is contained within the trumpet isn't the same length as the woe. So it happens that the first woe and the fifth trumpet end at the same time, and the sixth trumpet and the second woe begin at the same time. And they had often made the argument that when the second woe ended, the sixth trumpet ended. But we saw that the sixth trumpet actually carried on for another 1,533 days. So the sixth trumpet ended on October 22nd, 1844. So we could make an argument, we could actually count how many days that trumpet is. If we wanted to, we would just have to add 391 years, 15 days, or actually, and 15 days, and then add 1,533 days. And then we would have the whole length of the period of the sixth trumpet. So just a little detail that probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, but does matter to me. Now, he's dealing here with the distress of nations. So this was an issue, if you're reading through this idea, they know that the Ottoman Empire is involved in these conflicts that are happening in Europe. And of course, this becomes an important part of their understanding of prophecy, dealing with the divided Europe and how these prophecies all relate. Now, there's a lot of things that they miss out or they never address in their papers. And I'm not going to go into all the things that they miss, but the thing that they are focused upon is that Turkey has a role. And this role, of course, they get from Revelation 9. Now, what has happened within Adventism is that Turkey or Islam has been taken out of the way as far as Revelation 9 is concerned. They look at this as a futuristic prophecy, that it's talking about something about the future. It has nothing to do with Islam. And of course, we know that that's incorrect. Now, a lot of their arguments have to do with the way that this was understood at the time. So this argument dealing with how he calculated the date that he was wrong by some, well, they just say 10 days, but of course it would be 12 days wrong if he had done it the way that they think he should have done it. But of course, it could have been different lengths depending on how he should have done it. So there's different ways that he could have done it. But he chose the one way, which was just to ignore the change from Julian to Gregorian. So that's one of their arguments. The other argument has to do with the start of the 150 years, or the 5 months. And I included, I believe, in one of my emails, Alberto Treyer's paper dealing with all of his research on that date. If you look in Wikipedia, they will have July 27th, 1301. So they actually have it 2 years later. But Treyer shows, based on contemporary documentation, that it couldn't possibly have been then, based upon other things that were happening around at the time. He even deals with the weather and shows that some of these battles could not have occurred based upon the weather for those years that they have record of, based upon other things that were occurring at that time. But also we have this contemporary writer who was there when this occurred. And how, he doesn't give the date 1299, he gives July 27th, but he connects it with other events. And you can use his arguments and what he states to show that it's 1299. Now, Gibbons is the one that chose 1299 in the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But if you talk to people in Turkey, they mark July 27th, 1299 as the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. So that's traditionally the date, and there's no reason to discredit it, because when you look at the other arguments, they're actually weaker. So July 27th, 1299 being the start of the Ottoman Empire, it's historically the date that has always been given, and it's supported by the facts. But people will attack that. So it's something you need to know, that somebody's going to go onto Wikipedia and they will tell you, I looked on Wikipedia and it said July 27th, 1301. How do I know you're right? Now, you know, you might not get people who are that diligent and going to look things up. But if you do, I would read Treyer's paper on it. And there's just lots of other sources that say 1299. So it's not just because Wikipedia says it doesn't mean it's true. But most of the time, Wikipedia is actually pretty good, because there's so many people involved in the writing of it, and they argue out all these points before they put them up. So they're not. It's not just, you know, people can't just add to Wikipedia. Everything that's added has to be studied by all these volunteers. So anyway, so he talks about the six.
I just want to,
yeah.
Yeah, excuse me, Theodore. I just want to, how do you spell Treyer's name, the last name?
It's like Treyy. I can't remember. Here, I'll find it for you really quick.
Oh, thank you. And also, the thought came into my mind, I was wondering whether July 27th could have been Ishmael's birthday. I get these crazy thoughts sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to, there it is. It's Treyyer, Alberto Treyer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he has a site called Distinctive Messages, .com is his website, and he has his books and stuff there that you can download the PDFs. So it's pretty handy stuff, articles. I think this one would be an article. So you can all see that there. There's lots of things. I don't always agree with all of his decisions. There's a paper called George Knight's Conspiracy Theory. It's kind of interesting. Prophetic dates of the trumpets of Revelation. Yeah, it's here. It's called The Chronology of Events in the History of Pachymeres. So Pachymeres is this historian who was a contemporary. He was there at the time. So he's writing about events that were happening in his day. And it's a very, very good paper, very well researched. He doesn't have any loose ends, and he's not just making rhetorical arguments or fake arguments to just support his view. He's showing real and accurate information. So that's the paper I recommend. So,
Thank you.
okay, you're welcome. So so we have all these, there's a lot of research that can be done. Obviously, I know that everybody's not going to read every paper I recommend. But this is a good article to read, this one here that we're looking at. And what was the other point here? There was another. Yeah, so he shows that in 1449, he doesn't have an actual date. He just ends the 150 years. But there are events in the year 1449, which is obviously the important part there. So he's going to talk about diacoses again, which is dracoses at the bottom here, allowing the first period of 150 years to have been exactly fulfilled before dracoses ascended the throne. Then he's going to count this 15 years days commenced at the close of the first period. It will end on the 11th of August, 1840. So he's just going to have the close of the first period as July 27th. And now he's going to count 391 years and then counts 15 days when the Ottoman power in Constantinople may be expected to be broken. So now, so when it comes to what he's predicting, how do you decide that the Ottoman Empire's power has been broken? Well, it yielded to the 4 Turkish sultans. Now I have another paper here, which I probably should give people. See if I can find it. Oh, I might have closed it. So. Yeah, it's called August 11th Dateline. It's right here. I think that's going to work. Yeah. I'll blow this up a bit. So this is a well-written summary of the history behind August 11th, 1840. And this guy does a very good job of laying out all the different issues, all the history that was happening at that time. And I often have a hard time understanding. It took me a long time to understand it. I'd read Uriah Smith's account because I wasn't really familiar with the history and what had happened then. It was because they throw these words at you like Rifat Bey, what's that? Who's that? So he's going to do. What's that?
Yeah, Bey is like a Turkish, I don't know, some kind of a name of.
Yeah, but when you don't
honor them with some kind of a name like Bey. I've heard that before.
Yeah, so you have to, and then you got the Pasha and Muhammad Ali, right? So who is he? What is their connection? What's actually behind the battle? The war that's going on there. So for me, it took a long time reading this because I remember I started studying this in a lot more detail back about, would have been about 2011 that I started to first really look at this and try to understand it. So it took me a while. For some reason, I'm not good with names. If there was all numbers, it'd be easy. But names of people, I get them confused, and I just wasn't aware of that history. So he has this here, where he quotes from other sources. Muhammad Ali, the Pasha of Egypt, who had sent men and ships to help subdue Greece, decided to take advantage of the weakened state of Turkey to extend his own area of influence by invading Palestine on November 1831. So we've addressed this before, that there was this battle that happened in 1831, I think it's a 2-year battle. And then there's this other one that goes on from 1839 to 1841. So this period of time, this 1831 to 1841, this period of 10 years, there's these two different battles that occurred. Well, they're not battles, but they're wars. They have lots of little battles in it. And so Elder Jeff has put that up on a line and shown the significance of it. Now, of course, there's all this background that even goes before that with Turkey. You know, even back in 1809, they were trying to address the issue of Turkey. So, and Egypt, of course, is the king of the south. At this time, you know, that's what we would call, it's obviously France is the king of the south, but it's, you know, it's that area that used to be the king of the south. And so that's why there's this confusion regarding the king of the north and the king of the south in Uriah Smith's view, because Uriah Smith is saying, well, Egypt's the king of the south. He doesn't, when France comes and conquers and takes the Pope captive, he doesn't have France as the king of the south. He still has Egypt as the king of the south. And he has Turkey as the king of the north. So it's rather confusing the way that Uriah Smith does this. I think I did that right. I could have got it mixed up, because his view is rather confusing, because he has 3 powers instead of 2. There isn't just the papacy and France. He introduces Turkey and also Egypt. And it may be that he has, well, I can't remember. I'm not going to introduce something that might confuse you more. If you read Uriah Smith's, you'll see it's rather confusing the way that he looks at it, at least for me. So anyway, there's this battle in 1831. He advanced north, capturing Acre in May of 1832 and Damascus in June. The Sultan, in desperation, turned for help to Russia and made concessions to Muhammad Ali, ceding him Palestine and Syria. In 1839, the Sultan decided to strike back at Egypt, but his army was routed at Nezeb on the 29th of June, and the Turkish main fleet deserted in Alexandria. In July of 1840, Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia agreed to back Turkey, and Admiral Sir Robert Stopford ordered Captain Charles Napier to proceed to Beirut, which was captured on August 11th. So now the person writing this paragraph has left out a lot of detail, and in trying to understand what he means by captured, the Beirut was captured on August 11th. It wasn't really a battle or anything. So he says here, the writer of this, Syria rose in revolt and Napier moved on to Acre and took it in 3 hours. The Egyptians capitulated when Napier appeared off Alexandria. 32 British and 8 Austrian vessels operated off the coast of Syria. So, you know, one of the things that we see here is obviously Syria is part of this. Egypt is part of this. There's a lot going on in this war, plus all these powers, Russia, Prussia, France, Germany. At different times, these powers are trying to address this, and of course, England, Great Britain. Now he has here this next part about the Treaty of London. The affairs of the East interested Lord Palmerston in the highest degree. During the Greek War of Independence, he had strenuously supported the claims of the Hellenes against the Turks and executed the Treaty of London. So this Treaty of London was in 1839. But from 1830, the defense of the Ottoman Empire became one of the cardinal objects of his policy. He believed in the regeneration of Turkey. All that we hear, he wrote of Bulwer Lord Dowling, about the decay of the Turkish Empire and its being a dead body or a sapless trunk and so forth is pure, unadulterated nonsense. The two great aims he had in view were to prevent the establishment of Russia on the Bosphorus and of France on the Nile, and he regarded the maintenance of the authority of the Porte. So the Porte is the port in Turkey as the chief barrier against both these aggressions. Against Russia, and the Porte is a type of government, so it's a type of government that they have there. Against Russia, he had long maintained a suspicious and hostile attitude. He was a party to the publication of the Portfolio in 1834 and to the mission of the Vixen. So there's a lot of information here, but what he has here, when she came to the relief of the Sultan after the Battle of Konya with great jealousy, and when the power of Muhammad Ali in Egypt appeared to have threatened the existence of the Ottoman dynasty, he succeeded in effecting a combination of all the powers who signed the celebrated collective note of the July 27th, 1839. So yeah, the Treaty of London is in, and this is where I'm getting, 1839, 1809. We have the Treaty of Dardanelles in 1809, and 1839, that would be, so the collective notes, July 27th, 1839. The Treaty of London is in 1840, but that doesn't make sense. I have to look this up. I forget now. I apologize. Does anybody remember when the Treaty of London is? I should know this. It's just my mind's going blank. So we got, I know we have the Treaty of Dardanelles in 1809. And I'll find this here really quick. Okay, yeah, the Treaty of London is in 1840. So that is, okay, it's also called the Convention of London. And the collective note, yeah, so the Convention of London or the Treaty of London is also the ultimatum. So I'm getting a bit confused about this. I'm going to have to look this up again. I can't remember how this works. And I'm going to have to stop the share and do this over again. Okay, that's the wrong one. Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up again because I can't remember. I get these things confused. So he's going to talk about this treaty. So the collective note is on July 27th, 1839. And he's probably going to tell us here a bit later. So let's keep reading here. And again in 1839, when Baron Brunau first proposed the active interference of Russia and England, the offer was rejected. But in 1840, Lord Palmerston returned to the charge and prevailed. The moment was critical, for Muhammad Ali had occupied Syria and won the Battle of Nezeb against the Turkish forces. And on the 1st of July, 1839, the Sultan Muhammad expired. The Egyptian forces occupied Syria and threatened Turkey, and Lord Ponsonby, then British ambassador at Constantinople, vehemently urged the necessity of crushing so formidable a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire. So it's here, this underlined part, Palmerston, irritated at her Egyptian policy, referring to France, flung himself into the arms of the Northern powers, and the Treaty of the 15th of July, 1840 was signed in London without the knowledge or concurrence of France. So this treaty has the ultimatum attached to it. So this is what I was confused about. This measure was not taken without great hesitation and strong opposition on the part of several members of the British cabinet. Lord Palmerston himself declared in a letter to the Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, that he should quit the ministry if the policy was not adopted. So this was the important point. The date that needs to be considered is July 15, 1840, when the Quadruple Alliance was signed. This treaty was fulfilled on August 11, 1840, when the Turkish ambassador appeared with the ultimatum to leave Syria. So, yeah, so the Treaty of London, which was signed July 15, 1840, is also the ultimatum. So they approached the Turkish ambassador with this ultimatum to leave Syria. And in doing that, they put themselves under the control of the 4 Christian nations. That would be Russia, Prussia, Britain, and Germany. And the French were not favorable to what happened there. So the French weren't part of that. So hopefully that makes sense to people. So anyway, this is a paper which maybe what I'll do is I'll attach both these PDFs to an email and send them again in case people have lost them. So when this was delivered, that obviously marks the end of the 391 years in 15 days. So in trying to do this, I can actually just illustrate this a little bit more here. So remember, we had, this is this period of time in here. So you're going to have this July 27th, 1840 is marked by the 26th day of the 4th month. But nothing occurs on this date that fulfills prophecy, which I think is an important point. And what we have here is we had 1809, which was the treaty, or 1809, which was the Treaty of Dardanelles. And then we had the collective note on 1839. Now in each of these, the 26th day of the 4th month, on both of these here, is going to be July 27th Julian. But these events, the Treaty of Dardanelles and this collective note, these are actually going to occur 12 days previous to this. I've talked about this in other studies. So the July 27th Gregorian date is the date where the prophecy is fulfilled. The 360 years ends here, the 30 years ends here, which is the year and the month. But they're marked on the Julian calendar as the 26th day of the 4th month. But they're going to occur 12 days earlier. And the same thing happens here. In 1840, the 26th day of the 4th month is July 27th. But the event actually occurs on July 15th, which is the Treaty of London, which has the ultimatum that's going to be delivered on 15 days after July 27th. So it's actually from July 15th that you have that to August 11th, which is a period of 27 days from when the ultimatum is signed to when it gets delivered. So we have these Julian dates here that actually have these fulfillments of prophecy. And I think that's important when we look at our history, because we have July 18th and July 31st. One's the 26th day of the fourth month, one's the 10th day of the fifth month. They're both July 18th, in that one's a Julian and one's a Gregorian. So, you know, a person could argue that the Julian date, July 18th, which is the 10th day of the fifth month, is going to be combined at July 18th. Or another person could argue that it's not going to be fulfilled until July 31st, using the same type of argument. So it's unclear exactly which date we're going to pick, just because the waymark, or the biblical date, lines up with a date doesn't mean that's the date that we choose. But I would argue that it's probably going to be July 18th, based on there's two waymarks that are July 18th. And so they'll come together on the Gregorian date. But I could be wrong about that. I've changed my mind back and forth a few times. I know that both dates are important. Okay, so now we're going to go back to and finish off this study from the Three Angels' Messages source book on the first angel's message. And so one is, we saw how important Josiah Litch's prophecy is in the first angel's message. It is what gives impetus to the message. I probably could look at Ellen White's statement, but I don't know if we have enough time to go through everything. I might review that a bit next time. And just want to finish off some of this here. So here that says the Great Crisis, 1843. This is August 4th, 1842. They're going to go through all these different issues. And again, you can see that Revelation, the 9th chapter, becomes an important part of the Millerite proclamation of the first angel's message. So they're going to go over all this history again. And they're still focused upon what's happening. Now, part of the interesting point here is that they believe that the sixth angel, there's the sixth trumpet, ended on August 11th, 1840, and that they're now in the seventh trumpet. So they're looking at the seventh trumpet as being a period of, well, eventually it would be 1,533 days, but the seventh trumpet actually never began to sound until October 22nd, 1844. So they wouldn't have really understood this, because everything that they were doing was focusing upon 1843, or the Jewish year 1843. So they're going to go through, and this paper is a pretty good one, but it's mostly dealing again with what we just studied, Revelation 9. Now, this is an important paper, the lecture on the typical Sabbaths and the Great Jubilee. Miller's paper here, which is published by Himes in 1842, really sets the groundwork to understand, or to get Miller's understanding of the 2520, that it's based upon the Jubilee cycle and the typical Sabbaths. So it's not just about taking 360, or taking 7 years and taking a day for a year, multiplying it by 360. There was actually a lot more behind it. And in this paper, he makes some interesting points. And I'm going to make it smaller so I can look at the pages to get to where I want. And so he's going to talk a lot about the purpose of the Jubilee and the sabbatical cycle as far as freeing the prisoners. And let's see if I can find this other part I wanted. Yes. Yeah. So this is here on the second column, the first paragraph. Yeah, because he's going to all deal there with on the previous part with the Lord's release, the release of the prisoners. So it's this paragraph here. I always thought this was an interesting insight. If this then is the correct view on the subject, and the time is prefigured, when would the 7 years of the antitype begin? I answer, it must begin with the servitude and bondage of the visible people of God, for at the end of 7 years they must go free, or there would be no force in the type, and of course no fulfillment in the antitype. 7 prophetic years would be 7 times 360, equal to 2520 years. This bondage must begin with the kingdom of Babylon, the first kingdom of Daniel's 4 monarchies, which kingdoms were to make war with the saints and prevail against them until the Ancients of Days came. And these were to scatter the people of God into all the kingdoms of the earth and have dominion over them and exercise authority upon them. But Jesus called them to him and saith to them, Ye know that they which are accounted to rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority upon them. This was prophesied of by Moses and all the prophets down to John, Acts 3:20-24. And he shall send Jesus Christ, which before was preached unto you, whom the heaven must receive, until the time of restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of his holy prophets since the world began. So, he's going through here and showing this 25:20, and he's arguing that it has to begin in Babylon. And of course, there's a point. He's going to go through a lot of his other arguments at the end of page 38 on the right side. It says, in the 22nd year of Manasseh's reign, in the year before Christ, 677. On my chronology, 677 is the 20th year of Manasseh's reign. Depending how, whether you're going spring to spring or fall to fall, might change that a bit. So he goes through the Isaiah prophecy. And then we get here at the bottom of column 1. It says, I will cause them to be removed into all kingdoms of the earth because of Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, for that which he did in Jerusalem. Tells us the same thing, that Judah as well as Israel must be made captives. Israel began to be carried away in the days of Hoshea. So this is the one where he talks about stretching this line of Jerusalem over the line of Samaria, or the line of Samaria over the line of Jerusalem. And it's because of Manasseh. So he says, Israel began to be carried away in the days of Hoshea, 722 BC, and from that time to 1798 after Christ is exactly 2520 years, or the 7 prophetic years. How remarkable that when the 7 years ended, God began to deliver his church from her bondage, which for ages had been made subject to the kings of the earth. In 1798, the church came out of the wilderness and began to be delivered from her captivity. Then he says, but the completion of her slavery to the kingdoms of the earth is reserved for another period, beginning in BC 677 years, 7 prophetic years, or 2520 common years, which would end in AD 1843. So this becomes another really important point to understand, obviously, the 2520 and how Hiram Edson, he ended up saying that this initial argument that Miller is referring to, that you have, and the way he's marking it, 1843, 722, and then he's going to have, 1798, and then he's going to go 677 to 1843. And so he's going to recognize these 2 periods of 20 years. Of course, in both of them, in this one, he has the right ending but the wrong beginning, because this would actually be 2519 years. and this one he has the wrong ending, because this would be 19 years. So we know that this actually was 723 when Hoshea was taken captive, and this is 1844, October 22nd, when the 2520 for Judah ended. So he's stretching over the line of Jerusalem. He's stretching the line of Samaria over the line of Jerusalem. And so he recognized this part of it. And I'm kind of amazed that he didn't develop this more. But of course, he's focused at the end point here. But he would have seen a lot more if he could have seen what Hiram Edson saw. And then I'm kind of amazed that Hiram Edson rejected this one and then took this one. Why they couldn't both see that they're both valid. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. But of course, it wasn't the time for these to be understood. Now, in context of here, we can see that 1798 has an important place. Because when we talk about August 11th, 1840, which we've been focusing on mostly, as this is the period of when the first angel's message is empowered, and Ellen White starts the first angel's message here in 1840. And we have all this other history here, but we can see that if you have the 2520, you now have a really powerful argument for showing that the first angel's message arrives here. And that's because a work is beginning that's going to address Protestantism. And Protestantism has this test, which is going to end on April 19th, 1844. But the United States has to rise. So the United States is Protestantism. The United States is entering here into history in 1798. So it has to begin here. It has to begin at the end of the 2520 for Northern Israel, where this two-horn power arises, republicanism and Protestantism. You know, so you're going to have this beast here, which I'm just going to draw here with two horns. That's this beast. And you got republicanism and Protestantism. So these two horns become extremely important. And the first horn is going to be tested in this history. Protestantism is going to be tested. The United States is still Republican all through this. It actually doesn't even have a Republican Party until 1861. But this is a Republican nation. It's built on a republic, based upon a constitution, constitutional republic, but it's also Protestant. But the Protestant horn is going to be tested first. And so in understanding this first angel's message, you know, you cannot just start it here. You can't say the first angel's message began here. You can't say it began here. You can't say it began here. It becomes present truth here. And this period of darkness then becomes necessary, that you're going to have this time of the end. So this time of the end is necessary for the first message to arrive. And this wasn't necessarily understood in Millerite history. And you don't see Ellen White, you know, start this reform line back here. You know, she talks about this history, but she focuses upon from when the first angel is empowered. And we sort of do the same thing too. When we look at our lines, we're, you know, we don't always put the time of the end in there. We don't always put all these other things in there. We're often starting at 9/11 here, which is also this. So we're even looking at a smaller point of time. Depends on where we're studying. So the first angel's message, in trying to understand this, you know, to try to sum this up, we recognize that there's these time prophecies, the 2520. I haven't really addressed the 2300 days, but I have addressed it in the studies on Ezra. But we know that Miller's view of it is simple. We're going to look at it a little bit more, obviously, as we get into the second angel's message. We're going to study a little more detail about the 2300 days and how we started. We're going to refer back to some of these things that we've done in our other studies. But the main point here is to see that the first angel's message develops, and our message develops. And we also can see that they had a midnight cry and a true midnight cry. And the same thing would have to occur in our line. There'd have to be two different groups that are addressed. And the first group that's addressed is going to be addressed under what we would call the midnight cry. The second group that's going to be addressed is going to be addressed under what we call the loud cry. And so there's these parallels between these two. And to understand that, I think to understand that where we are in this line is, in a sense, we're more paralleling this history up to April 11th to some degree, or April 19th to some degree. But, you know, there's more to it than that. But, and I want to show that when I start to go through the second angel's message. Where we went off, why the fractals, the way that we were doing them, was actually causing confusion. And that when we started to get on track, these lines were used against us. So I'm going to try to illustrate that as we go through this history, because I really want us to understand our history. And I don't think we understand this history well enough, you know, and then maybe I haven't even done it justice yet, but I think we'll see more as we start to look at Samuel Snow's letters. And we're gonna deal with the end of this history too. So we're not even really out of this yet. We're not going to just jump right into the second angel's message yet. We're going to look at the problems that actually happened here with Samuel Snow and Miller in our next study. So hopefully that's not too confusing. I want you to know where we're going, that we're trying to thoroughly establish Millerite history, and then we're going to finally look at our lines and try to parse them out a little bit better, at least in the way that I understand them, because I think there are just points that we're missing, and also ideas that were brought in that I think were wrong, and that we still haven't kind of weeded out, because we have to separate the precious from the vile, because there was definitely error that was brought in to this message, and we have to understand why we're rejecting certain things and we're not rejecting other things. Because I know there are many people who've written me who have argued that we need to basically go back to the starting board, you know, or back to the drawing board, right back to the start, and ignore everything that came in from all these different false movements. And some of them would even go so far back as to get rid of you know, Ezra 7:9 and things like that. They want to go way back, but most are looking at certain things that they have, I would call them pet theories, that they have about what they think is going to happen. And I don't think that they're actually getting rid of as much error as they think. I think they're actually holding on to a lot of error that came in and haven't recognized its error yet. And hopefully they do. So I've chosen a different way to look at this. Another way to kind of look at the problem is that we, in a sense, after November 9th, in a sense, not really, but we did go into a type of tarrying time. And that is, we came to a period where, you know, we had a type of disappointment for the priests, not a disappointment for the Levites. We had a disappointment, and you know, we then had to sort out what was wrong. And I think it's important that we don't throw out truths that came, because I know that Satan, and I've said this many times, that Satan will use truth mixed with error for two reasons. One is to make error more palatable, but also to make to bury truth with error, so he covers it over. And we saw this, of course, in William Miller's dreams, with the jewels that were covered with all this rubbish. So bringing in error will cover up truth, but you don't want to just get rid of everything. You have to recognize that there is truth there that's hidden. And I still think that we don't understand the lines properly. I remember years ago, you know, telling people I didn't understand the lines, and they thought, you know, this was some kind of confession that I didn't understand the message. The reason why I said I didn't understand the lines is because I recognized there was inconsistencies with how we understood the lines. I understood everything that was being presented. So it wasn't like I didn't understand the message. I just knew that there was a problem with the lines. I just didn't know what they were. And I'm not saying that I even understand completely now, but I do think that we can look at these lines and examine. If we examine the Millerite lines, we can get a better understanding of where we are now. And my view is that one is the lines of the Nethinims is an error that we need to address because it's not correct in how we understand the Nethinims, the Nethinim. So we need to really look at that. And I think, I've addressed it a little bit, but I think as we start to parallel Millerite history and our history, we will see that we've introduced this other line that doesn't belong there. And you definitely can't say the Nethinims are the 11th hour workers. That's the 11th hour workers are in any line the last group of people who come in. They aren't a separate line. So there's a lot of little points that I think, little details that came in that we need to examine. And I'm hoping really that people can help me with this as we go through it. I always feel like I'm just talking to myself doing this because I don't get a lot of feedback. But I do get feedback, through emails. And so if you have any thoughts and you don't want to talk on the video, you can send me an email. But hopefully as we start to get into some of the nitty-gritty details of what's happening now, you guys will get a little more involved in trying to say, here's where I think the problem is, or here's some insight that I have on some point that might help us work through these things. And because I don't think that we're really doing this right now. We're not really examining the lines, at least not in the way that I think that we should. We've recognized that there was error, but we haven't really point by point figured out where it is. So that's my thoughts on where we're going as we go through Millerite history and then into our history. So any final comments or questions on this? Is everybody awake? I know I got people online here. So Rudolph, you got a comment?
No, I was just going to say thank you. It's very thorough. To me, I don't have many comments because it's almost like the first time I hear it. So not the first, but yeah, I can't pick errors out of it. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, you're welcome. And well, I think what we can do is we can close with prayer, and then we can say our goodbyes. So let's kneel. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the light that has shone upon our path and for the foundation that was laid. Lord, as we examine this foundation, we see again and again that this was laid correctly, but our understanding has been faulty. Help us, Lord, to follow you and the way that you have led in the past, that you can lead us again as you have been. Help us to see our error, to recognize truth, even when it's mixed with error, and to separate it from that error so that we can see it in its true light. We pray for each person involved in these studies. We ask, Lord, that you can help us all to follow and serve you, to reveal your character in all that we do. And we thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.